Moldovans have voted in elections framed as a vote on their country's entire future. They've chosen to embrace the West over the East, or so it appears, in a campaign beset by allegations of Russian interference. But the path to EU membership for Europe's poorest country still has bumps ahead. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Moldova's Liberal pro-EU party has kept its majority in Parliament after one of the most intense elections in its history. The PAS party of President Maia Sandu says this is further proof that Moldovans want a future inside the European Union. But pro-Russian opposition still picked up significant support.
It was an election pitted as a battle for Moldova's soul. President Maia Sandu's pro-EU PAS party kept its majority in parliament, defeating an opposition of largely pro-Russian forces.
I do believe that Russia has not achieved its objectives. It has spent a lot of money in these elections, but the results show that they failed.
During the campaign, there were allegations of interference from Moscow, with claims of fake news websites and bribing voters. The Kremlin has denied any interference and made counterclaims about Moldovan authorities manipulating the vote themselves.
Moldovan authorities closed bridges and declared quarantine so that not all citizens were able to vote. But even despite these manipulations and obstacles, if you discount votes from citizens abroad, the opposition managed to get more votes inside Moldova than Maia Sandu's party.
Moldova is Europe's poorest country. It's positioned between the EU and NATO on one side and war-torn Ukraine on the other. It has two pro-Russian regions within its territory, the Gagauzien Turks in the south and the breakaway Transnistria region in the east, meaning its politics have become a proxy battle in the conflict between Russia and the West. Sandu and her party have won multiple elections and a referendum on taking Moldova down a Euro-liberal path.
I think a lot of young people started to go vote, me included. I voted for the first time. And I think we have a bright future ahead of us.
There was no rigging. This has been checked so much, no one would have risked rigging it. So the vote was very democratic and beautiful. I'm glad that our Moldova will become a member of the European Union.
Many Moldovans will share this sentiment, hoping that their country is now firmly on the path to EU membership. But for this divided society, it's a long road ahead and likely to have many twists and turns.
Well, let's meet our guests from Istanbul. I'm delighted to say we're joined by Lucia Scripcari. She's an international lawyer and researcher of Moldovan affairs. In Berlin, in Germany, we have Ben Aris. Ben is editor-in-chief of IntelliNews and former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. And here with me in the studio, I'm joined by Dr. Cristian Nitoiu from Loughborough University's Institute for Diplomacy and International Affairs. And alongside me, we have also Alexander Vassiliev, who is a geopolitical analyst and a former KGB intelligence officer. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Lucia, to you, first of all, the people of Moldova, your country, have spoken. They've said yes to Europe, yes, overwhelmingly to the European Union, and a future that does not involve Russia. It's a pretty strong statement.
Yes, indeed. These elections show that Moldova took a decisive turn towards European Union membership. Clearly, these elections were about geopolitical orientation, which is very distinct from other types of elections that you see throughout the world. I mean, here clearly you have foreign policy at the center of political campaign. So we have two camps, pro-Russia camp and pro-EU camp. And the pro-EU camp, governed by Sandu administration, the PAS political party, achieved victory and secured majority in order to continue its goal to have Moldova integrated into EU by 2028. Let's see how successful they will be. But clearly, this also validated the last year's referendum held in Moldova, which aimed to amend the Moldovan constitution to include EU integration as a strategic plan of Moldova.
Thanks, Lucia. Ben, to you, give us your reaction to this result, because more than 50% voted for PAS, the ruling party, pro-Europe. This was quite an endorsement of all their plans and policies.
Yes, it was on the surface. The ruling party PAS got over 51% in a parliament with 101 seats. So they've got a clear majority. There's no need to do a coalition, and they voted to follow Sandu's policy, which is basically EU accession, and go the Western route. However, there were lots of problems with the elections, and it wasn't entirely free or fair, in so much as there was a lot of what we described as taking a leaf out of Putin's book, managed democracy, in so much as the goal to push through and make sure that they stay on this European path in the face of like heavy Russian interference, meant that the government used its so-called administrative resources in order to ensure that it skewed the vote towards the EU parties. And that's in the face, I mean, Russians were pouring money into it, so it became a battleground. As our colleague just said, it was a geopolitical battleground between a choice between East and West. Nevertheless, they did things like there was only 2 polling stations opened in Russia, and you've got 400,000 Moldovans living there, whereas polling stations in the EU were working fine. Nista, which is a breakaway republic, is also technically part of, under the constitution, Moldova, but again, there are reports that there was no polling there, and that's a pro-Russian region which is under occupation by Russian military. So again, it's not exactly free and fair, and so on and so forth. There was a lot. The
result stands, Ben. The result stands. Let's bring in Alexander. Alexander, why was Russia so interested in this election? If we are to believe these allegations of interference in the democratic process, why would Russia be so interested in a tiny country, 2.4 million people?
Well, look, first of all, about the interference, I don't think many Russians feel any shame about this interference. Most Russians who are interested in international politics would tell you that the United States, for instance, has been doing it for decades. So if the leader of the so-called free world has been doing this for many, many years, why shouldn't Russia do the same thing, right? Now, about the interest in Moldova, it's obviously it's an important geopolitical area, right? And it's between Ukraine and Romania, between Ukraine and NATO. But the problem here is that I think a major factor behind the results of these elections was the war in Ukraine. Because to understand it, I think it's important to understand that the war in Ukraine is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between Russia and NATO. So if there is a serious confrontation between pro-Russian forces in Moldova and NATO, Moldova will become a new battlefield in the same war.
You think the people of Moldova were scared of this happening?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let's bring Cristian in on that point. Cristian, you're originally from Romania. I should tell our Roundtable viewers, so you know this area like the back of your hand. Give us your reading of the result.
Well, I think it's definitely an impressive result for the pro-European forces. If we were to have this discussion like 17 or 18 years ago, no one would have thought that something like this is possible, an absolute majority. And I think the PAS party needs to be congratulated because it managed to coagulate all of the pro-European forces. Because in the past, you would have squabbling between them. And I agree with our colleague here that the war in Ukraine has had an important impact on these elections because it allowed pro-European actors in the country to come together and understand that, let's say, membership to the European Union is very much at hand if Moldova shows that it's committed. So a lot of Moldovans who came out to vote, and I think there were people waiting hours at various polling stations across Europe to vote, came out specifically because they see the future of Moldova with Europe and not going back in the past and embracing a future with Russia.
Thank you, Cristian. Lucia, just to you on that point about Ukraine, from speaking to your friends and colleagues, your family back home in Moldova, how much of an issue was the war in Ukraine when it came to people in Moldova voting?
It was one of the main electoral strategy, I can say, because the flyers that the PAS political party was spreading had on the flip side the the image of war in Ukraine. So that it was appealing to people because Moldovans were hosting refugees from Ukraine. So being at the forefront, people were aware that war in Ukraine could come, spread towards the frontiers of Moldova. So I agree with my colleagues that there was a dichotomy, I think, between West and East, peace and war, if you will. So indeed, the war in Ukraine has an impact on Moldovans voting for the pro-European political party.
Thank you, Lucia. Ben, I just want to read to you an opinion piece in the Times newspaper in London this week where they say about this election, rarely has there been a campaign in Europe as corrupt, manipulated and flagrantly determined by bribery and incitement. That's a pretty damning statement about an electoral process, isn't it?
Well, you have to bear in mind that Moldova is a very young country. It's also the poorest country, or was until Ukraine war started, in the whole of Europe. And it's failed over the last 30 years since the end of the socialist experiment to actually embrace any of the reforms or growth or anything that's needed to drive it forward. And consequently, this affects the system. I mean, it's still run by money. And unfortunately, as the others have said, it sits in this very strategic location between East and West. It's got a war in Ukraine going on. It's got the strip of this region on the east side is actually occupied by Russian soldiers. And so it's got Russia breathing down its neck. It has it by a stranglehold because Moldova is entirely dependent on Russian imports of gas to power the country. And yet on the other side, to the west, it's got Romania, an EU member. And the country's caught in this pincer, this geopolitical pincer. And within that, the politicians are trying to manage their way through with not enough money, with a dysfunctional economy, and with these, great powers, NATO or Western Europe sitting on one side and Russia on the other, with enormous interests in the country. So that's a very toxic mix.
Thanks, Ben. Alexander, to you, what do you think Russia will do now? I mean, the election is done and dusted. The result is there, and Moldova will now push on towards joining the European Union. How do you think the Kremlin will view Moldova and this result? What happens next?
Well, a lot of things depend on the war in Ukraine again. There is a plan, for instance, which is quite a popular plan in Russia. It's been discussed by experts, for instance. If the war continues, the Russian troops may try to build a corridor between Crimea and Transnistria. So if the Russians manage to build this corridor between Crimea and Transnistria, taking Odessa, so Transnistria will have a common border with the Russian territories. And another thing, which is very important, this way the Russians will cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. So from the Russian point of view, strategic point of view, it actually makes sense.
Let's bring Cristian in. Cristian, what do you think of that as a strategic plan, if that is indeed what Russia wants to do?
Well, I'm not convinced that for Russia, Moldova is actually a priority. Obviously, there are many Russian-speaking people and Russian ethnics and citizens living in Moldova, so Russia would have a stake in the country as well. But it's definitely a very small country. It has a strategic role, but not a significant strategic role. It doesn't have access to the sea. Even the small breakaway region of Transnistria, even if it hosts a number of Russian soldiers, the military equipment that's there, it's very much outdated and can't be used for anything. And even the regime in Transnistria has been has had, I would say, a nuanced approach towards Moscow, and especially towards the war in Ukraine. So I would say that for the government in Russia, having some sort of control in Moldova is paramount, but it's not a main priority. There are various individuals who have different ties with Moldova, maybe ethnic ties, maybe they were born there, maybe they have a special interest, but these are not the ones that are driving policy in the Kremlin.
Thank you, Cristian. Lucia, to you, let's talk about European Union membership. So President Maia Sandu of Moldova has said she wants this to be delivered now within the next 5 years. How important is it, given the result in the election, that she fulfills this promise?
It's been the main objective of the political party in these elections, and it's also clearly has been reflected in the last year's referendum. So Moldova, 1/3 of the population lives in absolute poverty. Absolute poverty means what? You cannot pay even your bills. So European integration means economic prosperity for Moldova, the attraction of investments. We've been mentioning about Russian interference. I just want to provide this my personal opinion, in this sense. So yes, there were accusations that Russia was funneling money into Moldova to influence the voters, buy the votes, and so forth and so on. However, I think Russia could use a European model of investing in Moldova, funding some, projects regarding hospitals, schools, building roads. There is no evidence of any project recently that, even before these elections, that Russia has carried out in Moldova. So obviously, the people will look towards where? Towards a union that promises to foster economic growth, and this is what really people need.
Thank you, Lucia. Ben, to you, if I look back over the last 2 decades, only one country in 18 years, Croatia, has been admitted to the European Union. So Moldova having big ambitions and the people very much now wanting to join the European Union, it's not going to be straightforward.
Since the fall of the Soviet Union, the best and really only workable reform strategy there has been for these former Warsaw Pact countries is join the EU. And those that did, last round in 2003, they've all flourished. They've done spectacularly well. Russia's up there along with them, but only because it has masses of oil and gas. And the problem is that this EU accession thing now is transformed. Before it was based on economic arguments and trying to get these countries ready. They have a lot of work to do before they're even taken on as candidates. But now it's become political, in so much as Europe is being divided between the EU camp and the Russia camp. And countries like Moldova are being offered membership, not just because, the EU should expand and take in all the European countries, but also just to keep it out of Russia's clutches. And the same is true of Ukraine. And there's another problem, because Moldova and Ukraine's membership, they were taken in at the same time, along with Georgia, actually. And they were going to, in parallel, be brought into the Union. But now there's talk of breaking them apart, doing them individually. And Sandu was asked about this yesterday after the elections, and she didn't comment on it. Zelensky's pushing very hard to keep them linked, but it's going to be difficult. And the 5 years she's talking about, that's actually very fast, because normally it takes a decade. They've done all the preparations. The screening process of the laws is complete, but the negotiations on the clusters to actually become a member, which can take at least 5 years, if not 10, has not yet started.
Thank you, Ben. Alexander, to you, if Moldova pushes ahead and this happens and they do join the European Union in the next few years, how will Russia view that?
I think that generally Russia would prefer to deal with each European country on one-on-one instead of dealing with the bloc. But here is an idea, and it's my personal opinion. I think that maybe Russia should encourage other countries to join the European Union, because the more countries join the European Union, the more dysfunctional it becomes. The idea of the European Union is not terribly popular in the European Union. Now, a lot of people living in Western European countries are dissatisfied with the European Union. They don't see it as a liberal democracy.
But they hammer out their differences.
Yeah, we had Brexit in this country.
Yeah, and look how that worked out.
Well,
look how that worked out. It was an absolute disaster. Cristian, to you, you grew up in Romania and you've known communist rule in Romania and you've known European Union life in Romania. What do you think the European Union has done for Romania?
Well, I would say that there's been quite significant investment coming into the country. I think membership of the European Union stabilized the political scene, so there haven't been too many infighting. But Moldova is a slightly different country. It's much smaller, it's much more divided. Even at these elections, half of the population, well, let's say at least 40%, focuses on building relations with Russia. So it's not going to be a straightforward, let's say, journey to the European Union. And these individuals, even when and if Moldova becomes a member of the European Union, will probably be disaffected with the EU.
Thanks, Cristian. Lucia, back to you. So accession talks started last year over this. What do the people in Moldova hope membership of the EU will bring?
Definitely fight against corruption, rule of law, economic prosperity, as I mentioned, disinformation, which was very evidenced in these elections. These are the main objectives. People being able to pay their bills and work opportunities. There are so many young people living abroad. So definitely Moldovans want to see their children at home.
Working hard, getting opportunities and moving forward. So Lucia, just tell me, at the moment, 2.4 million people in Moldova, do you think if European Union membership does come in the next few years that very educated, talented young Moldovans like you might move home and build the country further?
I totally believe in that. And actually, we can see now in the current political party led by Sandu, we see more young people and specialists. And that is very different from the previous, political bloc and members of the political party. So now clearly the young people are slowly, let's say, going home and try to contribute to their homeland. There are many challenges. As you can see now, there are 5 political parties, and the opposition parties are very different. Some of them claim that they will be as loud as possible against the wrongs that they see in the government. However, paradoxically, it can help, the Sandu administration to improve itself, so that these wrongs that they are detected cannot be used and exploited again by Russia, let's say, in the future elections.
Thanks, Lucia. Ben, just final point to you. The next few years are going to be very, very important for Moldova. Can you see them getting over all the obstacles they need to join the European Union?
I think you're right that this election was key because it basically clears the path for the EU accession. And so now going forward, the roadmap is clear. And, on the 2 points you're talking about, the corruption that Lucia was just talking about, the beauty of joining the EU which is why I say it's been a fantastic reform strategy for any government, is it comes with two things. It comes with pre-built, fully functional institutions, and it comes with a lot of money, grants for structural, infrastructural investments, and particularly agricultural subsidies. And agriculture is a major part of the Moldovan economy. But on the corruption front, for example, one of the 6 clusters is totally dedicated to judicial reform, anti-corruption reform, and there's no getting around it, because a lot of the former socialist blocs, they tend to ignore this institutional reform and just get on with the business of making money to pay the bills. But joining the EU, you can't avoid it. And it's set out in detail in these chapters, every step that you need to take, and you have to tick them off. And the Sandu government, what they've got to do now is just, roll up their sleeves and start working through this blueprint of success that EU membership entails.
Ben, thank you, and to Lucia as well, and Cristian and Alexander here in the studio with me. Thank you all. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.